The sun was going down behind the Mason Ridge auction yard, its last gold lines filtering through a haze of dust and the steel bones of battered trailers. The air shimmered with heat and the distant buzz of insects, but the crowd clustered in the middle of the lot, drawn to something more primal, a promise of spectacle. On the edge of the auction circle stood a cage built out of reinforced steel, more fitting for a bear than a dog. Inside, a German shepherd so massive his head nearly touched the top bars paced in slow, predatory circles. He was scarred across the snout, one ear notched, and his eyes, amber and wild, never left the shifting crowd. He'd already broken one handler's wrist, the whispers went. Some folks claimed he'd bitten through a car tire once. Kids watched with their hands pressed to their mouths, half horrified, half hoping something would happen. From behind a battered pickup truck, Benedict Cross stepped into the circle, Stetson tilted low, boots shining as if the dust feared him. He carried himself like he owned every acre of Mason Ridge, because, in a way, he did. Cross didn't need a microphone. His voice carried, oiled and sharp, over the murmurs. 10 grand to anyone who can sit next to that beast for 5 minutes. Go on, try it. His grin was all teeth. He just needs a little discipline. Any takers? Laughter scattered like loose coins, mean and sharp. No one moved. The dog growled, lips rippling, claws scraping the cage floor. Off to the side, in a pair of boots, 2 sizes too big, stood Caleb Morgan, 13, foster kid, hands jammed into his pockets, face dirty from a day's work at the stock pens. He looked like he belonged anywhere but here. His foster aunt Ruth watched him from the shade, worry creasing her brow. Caleb's hair was sun-bleached, his cheeks hollow, and there was a way he seemed to shrink when people looked at him too long. But something changed in him when Cross started talking. Caleb's hand slid into his coat, and he pulled out an old harmonica. Beat up, one end chipped, metal dulled from years of use. He looked at the cage. The German shepherd, as if sensing a different kind of stare, froze and turned. Someone elbowed their friend. What's the kid gonna do? Play it a lullaby? Cross caught sight of Caleb, and his smirk soured just a little. Well, now, looks like we got us a hero. Step up, son. You ain't scared? Caleb didn't answer. He stepped up, close enough to smell the rust on the cage and the dog's fierce, sour breath. The shepherd pressed its body against the bars, hackles up, teeth bared. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Don't do it, kid. He'll rip you apart." But Caleb knelt. He didn't look at Cross, or the crowd, or even at Ruth. He sat on his heels, boots kicking up a puff of dust, and brought the harmonica to his lips. The first notes came out thin, almost lost in the murmur, but then settled into a slow, searching tune. Part lullaby, part plea. The melody was halting, like the boy was asking a question he didn't know the words for. The crowd's laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. The only sound was the wind sighing through the cottonwoods and Caleb's song. Weaving between the bars, the shepherd stared, muscles taut, ears twitching. After a long moment, long enough for people to start shifting their weight, embarrassed by the hush, the dog's head lowered. He stopped pacing. The growl faded to a low whine. He sat, heavy and deliberate, on his haunches, eyes locked on Caleb. Someone gasped. Even Cross looked uncertain for a flicker of a second. Caleb finished the tune, let the harmonica drop to his lap. He didn't reach out. He didn't smile or speak. He just waited, breathing in time with the dog. Benedict Cross cleared his throat, voice hoarse. Fine. Take him then. All right then. He's yours. The crowd broke into scattered applause, half mocking, half disbelieving. Cross tossed a heavy set of keys onto the ground, dust rising. You break him, you buy him, son. Ruth hurried forward, grabbing Caleb by the shoulder, but the boy didn't move. He waited until the cage door groaned open and the shepherd, who had not taken his eyes off Caleb, stepped out, slow as a ghost. Caleb stood, harmonica in one hand, leash in the other, and together, under the pale bruise of the evening sky, they left the auction yard. As they walked, the shepherd stayed just close enough to brush Caleb's leg, every muscle wound tight, as if expecting a blow that never came. Caleb didn't say a word. He just played a few soft notes. The two of them, a strange, silent pair, vanishing down the rutted lane. Behind them, Cross glared after the boy and the dog, his laughter now a hollow thing. Somewhere, high above, a hawk circled, its shadow flitting across the dirt, silent and unseen. That night, in every diner and pickup cab across Mason Ridge, people would tell the story of the monster in the cage and the kid with the harmonica, each retelling stranger than the last. But for Caleb and the dog, the night was just beginning. Night pressed close around the goat farm on the edge of Mason Ridge, a blanket of silence pierced only by the low bleats from the barn and the distant restless sigh of the wind through dry grass. Caleb sat on the warped back step, knees pulled up to his chest, the harmonica cool against his lips. He'd washed up after dinner, left his boots by the door, and watched his breath ghost in the sharp spring air. Beside him, the German shepherd stood at the end of his leash, taut as a wire. In the glow from the kitchen window, his scars looked deeper, his eyes wilder. Ruth had tried to coax him toward the house. A soft voice, a strip of leftover bacon. But the dog wouldn't come closer than a dozen paces, no matter how she cajoled. "It's like he's waiting for someone to yell," she'd muttered, arms folded, eyes darting between the boy and the dog. Or worse. Caleb just nodded. He understood waiting. He understood holding your breath until someone's anger passed. Understood silence as armor. Sometimes he wondered if he'd always been this quiet, or if he'd learned it like a bad habit. He blew a few notes, letting them drift over the yard. The shepherd's ears twitched. He made no move to come near, but his hackles didn't rise either. That was something. Caleb watched him out of the corner of his eye, careful not to stare. "You gotta name him," Ruth said, voice softer now. She came out, drying her hands on a towel, the porch light catching the gray in her hair. "You know, if he's staying." Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to name something that might disappear. But he looked at the dog, at the scars, the cautious weight in his gaze, like a ghost caught between worlds. "Ghost," Caleb said finally. Ruth's mouth twitched. "That fits." She tried again to toss the bacon, but Ghost just watched it land in the dust, untouched. Ruth gave up with a sigh. You're not scared of him, are you?" Caleb shook his head. "You know he could hurt you if he wanted." "I know." "Why'd you do it? Back at the auction yard?" Caleb shrugged. He looked scared, not mean, just didn't want to be there. Ruth studied him a long time, then squeezed his shoulder. "You're a strange one, Caleb Morgan, but maybe that's just what he needs." She went inside, the screen door creaking, leaving the boy and the dog alone under a sky, just beginning to stutter with stars. In the dark, the farm felt bigger, like the world could tip them off its edge if it wanted. Caleb set the harmonica aside and lay back on the splintered step, looking up at the sky. He listened for Ghost's breathing, slow and shallow. For a while, they just existed like that, neither quite trusting, neither quite leaving. The days that followed unfolded slow as honey. Ghost wouldn't cross the threshold of the house, so Caleb started leaving the back door cracked, sliding a bowl of food just outside and waiting on the stoop. Every morning Ruth would shake her head at the tracks in the dirt. "You sure you want to do it this way? He could run, never come back." Caleb nodded. "If he wants to go, I can't stop him." But Ghost didn't run. He kept his distance, circling the edge of the yard, sleeping in the shadow of the barn. At night, Caleb would sit near him, or reading aloud from battered paperbacks, or drawing in his sketchbook by flashlight. Sometimes he'd play the harmonica, slow and low, and Ghost would rest his chin on his paws, eyes half closed. Word spread in town about the kid with the killer dog. At school, the stories grew wilder. How the shepherd had once fought a coyote pack. How Caleb had tamed him with a look. Caleb ignored the whispers, drifting through his days like a leaf in the wind. But not everyone kept their distance. One afternoon, as Caleb waited outside the principal's office, another incident, another misunderstanding, a group of older boys found him, Tyler Grady, with his crooked grin and fists like bricks, leaned in close. "Heard you got yourself a monster," Tyler sneered. "Maybe you're just too dumb to know when to be scared?" Caleb stared at the ground. "He's not a monster." Tyler's voice dropped, mean and quiet. "Maybe you are." Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He just waited it out, the way he always did, silent and still. Eventually, Tyler's attention drifted, and the moment passed. But that night, as he drew Ghost curled up beside a shadowy barn in his sketchbook, Caleb added jagged lines around the dog's scars, lightning maybe, or something breaking free. Late in the week, Ruth's old friend from church, Mrs. Ellery, dropped by with a bag of apples and a worried look. "Saw that shepherd in your yard, Ruth. Dangerous breed, that. Maybe you ought to call animal control." Ruth poured her coffee slow, her back stiff. "He's not going anywhere. Caleb's got him." Mrs. Ellery clucked her tongue. "That boy's got enough trouble." Ruth just smiled, small and fierce. Sometimes trouble's the only thing that knows how to listen. It was a Saturday when something changed. Caleb was sitting by the barn doodling when Ghost crept up behind him, closer than he'd ever dared. Caleb felt the dog's breath on his neck and went still. He waited, counted 3 slow heartbeats before glancing sideways. Ghost stood just inches away, head low, ears relaxed. Slowly, carefully, Caleb held out his hand, palm up. The shepherd sniffed, then pressed his nose into Caleb's palm. Not a growl, not a flinch. Caleb just sat, quiet and patient. He started to hum, not even realizing it at first, just the bones of a song, a promise in the rhythm. Ghost's tail thumped once, slow and unsure. For the first time, Caleb smiled, tiny, almost invisible. From the kitchen window, Ruth watched, heart stuttering. She pressed a hand to the glass, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile trust was blooming. "Good boy," Caleb whispered. But he didn't push for more. He just sat, humming as the sun slipped down and the world around them softened. That night, for the first time, Ghost ate with Caleb sitting beside him. They shared the silence, the hush between notes, the space where fear slowly turned into something else. The story of the boy who didn't flinch made its way through town, changing shape with every telling. But in the quiet spaces of the farm, it was just a boy, a dog, and a song that promised not every cage is made of steel. The days stretched long and silent on Ruth's goat farm, dust swirling in the fields every time the wind shifted. Early mornings came with a cold sting and the breath of animals, a smell that clung to Caleb's shirt, grounding him in the steady routines of chores. Sunlight rolled across the barn roof, painting the wood in shifting gold and shadow. Everything about the place said, "Work first, talk later." And maybe that was why it felt like home, even if the word never quite fit. Ghost took up residence beneath the old maple at the corner of the goat pens, where he could watch everything but remain untouched by the world. He slept in the tall weeds, never venturing closer to the house than he had to. Any sudden noise, a bucket dropped, a car crunching the gravel drive, sent him scurrying behind the barn, hackles up, breath coming hard. Once, Ruth tried to toss him a biscuit from her apron pocket, but Ghost only stared, unmoving, until she walked away. Caleb learned to work around the dog's distance, never pushing. Each morning he left a bowl of water and a scoop of kibble near Ghost's chosen spot, whistling a soft tune as he did. Sometimes he'd sit in the dirt nearby, sketchbook propped against his knees, drawing goats as they shuffled and chewed. He read stories out loud, stumbling over words but never caring, his voice joining the low chorus of the barn. Some afternoons, with chores done, Caleb lay in the grass, face tilted toward the sky, harmonica resting in his palm. Ghost watched from a careful distance, head cocked as if trying to decipher the tune, or the boy himself. Ruth noticed the pattern, the slow orbit of trust building between the two. She watched through the kitchen window, the same way she watched the weather, alert for signs of trouble, but hoping for rain. "You let him come to you," she told Caleb one morning as he washed the breakfast plates. "That's different. Most folks try to force it. You wait." Caleb shrugged, hands deep in soapy water. "I know what it's like." Ruth didn't ask him to explain. Some things didn't need to be said. The farm was its own world, part wild, part worn. The goat pens stretched back toward the woods, fence posts leaning with age. The barn's paint had peeled away, the red turned to a muted rust. Wildflowers crowded the edges, stubborn against the trampled dirt. Caleb slipped easily into the rhythm, mornings feeding goats, hauling water, mending wire. Ruth gave orders in short bursts, her patience running long in everything but wasted time. She rarely talked about the past, her own or Caleb's. When she did, it came out sideways, like the story of the old barn cat who survived 2 winters by hiding in the haylofts, or the way she planted sunflowers along the fence each spring, even though the goats ate most of them by July. At night, the house was quiet. Caleb's room smelled of cedar and old books. Sometimes, when sleep wouldn't come, he listened for Ghost's breath just outside the open window, the steady in and out, a lullaby against the hush of night. But not every night was gentle. Some nights, Ghost whined, a low, haunted sound that drifted up into the rafters. Sometimes he'd bark at nothing, but pacing circles until the sky turned pale. Caleb would slip outside, settling in the grass nearby, humming or playing a slow tune until the dog quieted. Once, during a thunderstorm, Ghost pressed himself against the barn wall, shivering so hard his teeth clicked. Caleb sat in the mud, rain soaking through his shirt, and just waited. No words, no touch, only his presence, steady as the rising dawn. By midsummer, a fragile routine had formed. Ghost would lie near Caleb as he drew, close enough to feel the warmth between them. When the goats got too loud or a tractor rumbled up the drive, Ghost bolted for cover, but he always returned, circling wide before settling down again. Ruth watched this quiet companionship with equal parts relief and wonder. One afternoon, as she knelt in the garden, she caught Caleb scratching Ghost behind the ears for the first time. The boy didn't even seem to notice what he was doing. His hand moved slow and gentle, voice murmuring something only the dog could hear. "You're not training him," Ruth said later, after dinner, as they washed up side by side. "You're healing him." Caleb glanced out the window, where Ghost slept, curled beneath the porch. "He's healing me, too." Ruth put her hand on his shoulder, squeezing just once. That's what family does, I reckon." Word spread through town, as it always did, whispered through the pews at church, shared over fence posts and in line at the feed store. Folks talked about the Morgan place and the scarred dog who wouldn't let anyone touch him but the boy. Some wondered if Ruth was crazy to keep them both. Others, those who carried their own old wounds, watched with quiet hope. One Sunday, the preacher's wife brought by a pie and lingered in the doorway. "That shepherd yours, Ruth?" "Belongs to the boy," Ruth said, a smile just under her words. The woman nodded, thoughtful. "Strange world. Sometimes the broken things find each other." Trouble came, as it always does, in small, sharp moments. A coyote got into the goat pen one night, scattering the herd. Ruth and Caleb found Ghost circling the terrified animals, barking and snapping, driving the coyote off before it could do any harm. When it was over, Ghost stood at the edge of the field, chest heaving, eyes wide. Caleb approached slow, voice low and steady, and Ghost let him slip a hand around his neck, leash dangling loose. That night, as Ruth bandaged a frightened goat's leg, she looked at Caleb. "He's part of this place now. You both are." For the first time, Caleb believed it. He spent more time outside, sketchbook always close, his drawings filled with goats and wildflowers, with Ghost's hulking shadow and the slant of evening sun across the fields. In the margins, he scribbled music, snatches of song that never quite left his mind. Ghost, for his part, began to trust the shape of Caleb's days. He learned the rhythm of the farm, the clatter of buckets, the creak of the gate, the slow, quiet moments between chores. When Caleb read out loud, Ghost inched closer. When Caleb played, Ghost listened, his eyes soft, his body still. And as the days slipped by, something invisible but sure began to bind them, thread by thread, the way sunlight knits shadows at the end of a long day. Out past the edge of the fields, where the fence sagged and the wild grass grew tall, Caleb found a place just for them. He brought Ghost there at dusk, blanket and harmonica in hand, and they watched the world turn gold and blue. Caleb would play, the music drifting out across the quiet, and Ghost would lay his head in the boy's lap, two wounded hearts, slowly learning the language of belonging. Sometimes, Ruth would watch from afar, hand pressed to her chest, a prayer forming unspoken in her throat, and in the hush between song and silence, the ranch became not just a place that took them in, but a home, fragile and fierce, built from trust and small acts of kindness. The weeks after the coyote attack slid by in a kind of gentle, steady blur, one sunrise melting into the next, chores folding around the quiet rhythm of recovery. Summer pressed down on Mason Ridge, ripening the tomatoes and thickening the grass along the creek. Each morning, the sun poured gold across the goat pens, and the world felt, for a few brief hours, as if nothing bad could find them. Caleb rose with the birds, barefoot on the cool floor, careful not to wake Ruth as he slipped outside. Ghost was always waiting, a silent shadow near the porch steps, head lifted in greeting. The dog had begun to greet him with a small, breathy chuff. Not quite a bark, not quite a sigh, but something between the two. Caleb answered with a nod, the tiniest hint of a smile ghosting across his lips. Together, they'd circle the farm before the day really began. Caleb walked slow, letting Ghost set the pace. Sometimes the dog stayed close, brushing against his jeans. Other mornings, he ranged ahead, nose to the wind, muscles rolling under his battered coat. Caleb noticed the small things, how Ghost's tail, once tucked and tense, now swung low, loose, and easy, how his ears flicked back not in fear but in response to the songs of wrens and the hush of the breeze in the leaves. Caleb never reached for him unless invited. He'd learned to let Ghost close that distance. After chores, they'd retreat to the shade behind the barn. Caleb would sprawl in the cool dirt, sketchbook open, pencils scattered around him. Ghost would watch from a patch of sun, eyes half shut, paws crossed like a sphinx. Some days, Caleb read aloud, voice rough but steady, stories about pirates and explorers and castaways who found their way home. Other times, he just drew quick sketches of goat kids tumbling, Ruth hunched over her gardening, Ghost's strong, angular head silhouetted against the sky. One afternoon, as a thunderstorm rumbled in the distance, Ghost crept up behind Caleb, closer than he'd ever dared. Caleb felt the warmth of the dog's breath against his arm, the slow press of fur and muscle. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he kept sketching, heart pounding, as Ghost settled beside him, sighing out all the tension that had once coiled inside him like barbed wire. Later, when Ruth brought out lemonade and sandwiches, she found them both in the grass. Caleb leaning back against the barn, Ghost sprawled with his head in the boy's lap, eyes closed, a picture of perfect trust. Ruth set the tray down and watched a long moment, her chest tight with something halfway between grief and gratitude. You're not training him," she said softly, sitting down beside Caleb. "You're healing him?" Caleb shrugged, brushing a hand over Ghost's head. I think he's healing me too." Ruth smiled, her eyes shining in the late afternoon light. "That's the only way it ever works, honey. Both of you, together." Change came slow, but it came. One morning, as Caleb bent to tie his boots, Ghost pushed his nose into the boy's hand, seeking out the touch for the first time. Caleb froze, heart racing, then let his fingers drift behind Ghost's ear, scratching gently. The shepherd closed his eyes, leaning into the contact, trusting. That moment, small as it was, felt like crossing a river after years of standing on the bank. At the feed store, word spread of Ghost's transformation. Folks who'd once whispered, dangerous or wild, now watched with open curiosity as Caleb led him through the aisles, Ghost's tail wagging, his body loose and easy. Mrs. Ellery, who'd once clucked her tongue at the idea of a killer dog living among them, stopped Caleb by the register. "He looks like a new creature," she said, peering over her glasses. Caleb glanced at Ghost, who sat at his heel, eyes bright, tongue lolling. Maybe he's just finally home. Mrs. Ellery pursed her lips, considering. Took time, I suppose. Good things usually do. On the farm, the small victories piled up. A ghost started following Caleb everywhere, out to the back pasture, into the shed, even to the edge of the woods, where the light broke through the leaves in dapples and patterns. If Caleb paused, Ghost paused. If Caleb ran, Ghost raced ahead, circling back with a low, joyful bark. Ruth watched them from her kitchen window, her own wounds, grief for a brother lost, years of loneliness, easing just a little with every new sign of hope. She invited Caleb to sit with her in the evenings, shelling beans or snapping peas, while Ghost napped at their feet. People think healing is some big miracle, she said one night as the sun burned down to an orange line on the horizon. But really, it's all these little things. A look, a quiet touch, a day that passes without fear. Caleb nodded, head bent over a handful of beans. I used to think I'd never get there. We never really arrive, honey. We just keep moving forward, step by step. Caleb looked at Ghost. The big shepherd sprawled content in the twilight. Yeah, I think maybe he knows that too. There were setbacks, of course. Some nights, Ghost woke from bad dreams, howling at the moon, pacing the yard until sweat darkened his fur. Sometimes, a sudden noise, a slammed truck door, a goat's sharp bleat, would send him scrambling, eyes wild, heartbeat visible in the lines of his body. On those nights, Caleb never tried to force comfort. He'd sit nearby, humming softly or playing slow, gentle tunes on his harmonica until the panic faded. Sometimes Ghost would come, sometimes not. But always, when morning came, they'd begin again. Two survivors, moving forward together. One golden afternoon, as the sky filled with drifting clouds and the goats napped in the tall grass, Ruth called Caleb over to the porch. She handed him a faded photograph. Her brother as a boy, grinning beside a scrawny mutt. He was always bringing home strays, she said, voice soft. Never could stand to see something hurting and not try to help. Caleb studied the photo, feeling the thread of connection, loss, hope, the hard work of healing, running between the generations. He looked up at Ruth. I guess some things run in families. Ruth's eyes were wet, but her smile was strong. I hope so. By late summer, Ghost trusted Caleb enough to follow him even into the barn, weaving between the goat stalls, sniffing at the hay. The farm's rhythms, once broken by fear, now moved with a kind of fragile peace. One morning, Caleb found Ghost stretched out in a patch of sunlight, paws twitching in a dream. Caleb sat beside him, sketchbook balanced on his knees, and began to draw, slow, careful lines tracing the dog's sleeping form, the scars fading, the hope shining through. For the first time in his life, Caleb felt like he belonged somewhere, and beside him, Ghost breathed deep and easy. Safe at last. They'd made it, step by step, and though the world outside still whispered, judged, and doubted, here on Ruth's farm, trust was something you built, quietly, with patience and love, day after ordinary day. The days on the goat farm rolled by, slow as honey. Caleb and Ghost grew into each other's silences, and the rhythm of their lives settled into something almost gentle. But sometimes, even the wind over the grass seemed to carry the name of Benedict Cross, like a storm still far away but moving closer. It started with a rumor. Ruth heard it at the feed store, between sacks of sweet grain and the low murmur of old men playing cards by the cracked front window. Cross is mad about that auction, you know. Can't stand folks laughing at him. Someone spat tobacco into a paper cup. He's got a long memory, that one. Ruth brought the news home in the set of her shoulders and the worry in her eyes. That night, while Caleb scrubbed dishes and Ghost lay curled beneath the table, Ruth looked up and said, I want you to be careful, Caleb. Cross doesn't let things go. Caleb shrugged, eyes down. He's just mad 'cause I took Ghost. He'll get over it. But Ruth shook her head. Men like that don't forget. Not when their pride's at stake. It was a week later, just after dawn, when Caleb saw the first sign that Cross was not done with him. A battered pickup truck idled at the end of their driveway, engine growling, dust swirling around the tires. Ghost went stiff beside the porch, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Caleb watched as a man stepped out, one of Cross's ranch hands, big as a bull, face hidden under a ball cap. The man dropped a package at the gate and drove off without a word. Ruth opened it with a kitchen knife. Inside, a faded flyer for the Mason Ridge Fall Fair and a note written in harsh, angry block letters. "Bring the dog. I'll show you how a real man handles animals." Ruth's mouth tightened as she read. It's a challenge. He wants to drag you back into his world." Caleb studied the flyer. On the back, penciled in, was the promise of a rehabilitation demo. Cross's way of showing off. He'd bribed the fair officials before, twisting rules until they snapped. The fair was only 2 weeks away. Ghost pressed his body against Caleb's leg, trembling. The boy laid a gentle hand on the shepherd's neck. "We don't have to go, right?" Ruth's eyes softened. "We don't owe him a thing. This farm is yours, Caleb. Ghost's too." But the world outside their gates was not always kind. By the next morning, Cross's plans were everywhere. Flyers at the feed store, at school, even tucked under windshield wipers in the church parking lot. "Don't miss the show. See if the kid's dog can do it twice." The farm's peace was thin as spun glass after that. Ruth watched the road, flinched at every unfamiliar engine. Ghost was nervous too. Ears up, tail tucked, every sense straining for danger. At night, he paced circles by Caleb's bed, unable to rest. Caleb tried to hold the calm, but it slipped through his fingers. At school, Tyler Grady found him in the hallway, a sneer on his lips. "You gonna make your dog dance for us again, Morgan? Or is he gonna turn on you this time?" Caleb kept his head down, jaw clenched. "Ghost doesn't have to prove anything." Tyler laughed. "That's not what Cross says. Says you cheated. Says you dosed that mutt with sedatives. Said the only thing you're good at is lying." The words stung, but Caleb swallowed them whole, refusing to let them take root. That afternoon he sat in the grass behind the barn, fingers trembling as he played his harmonica. Ghost curled up beside him, muzzle pressed to Caleb's knee. Ruth joined them, lowering herself onto the scratchy old blanket. "Don't let him drag you back into his game, Caleb. Cross needs an audience, and he needs to feel big. But you just need to be yourself." Caleb nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds were gathering in the west. 2 days before the fair, word came through the grapevine that Cross had bought himself a new dog. Rex, they called him, a young German shepherd, underfed, scared, pulled from a rescue downstate. Folks at the feed store whispered about the way Cross trained his animals. Short on kindness, long on force. "He's going to show up the Morgan boy," one rancher muttered, "or he's going to break that dog trying." The image haunted Caleb, another shepherd, skittish and lean, dragged in front of a crowd forced to obey. It made his skin prickle, brought back memories of Ghost's first days, every flinch, every shiver, every silent plea for safety. That night, Ruth found Caleb staring out the window, Ghost pressed close at his side. "You okay, hon?" Caleb shook his head. "It's not just about us, is it? He's going to hurt that other dog. He doesn't care." Ruth reached over, brushing a strand of hair from his eyes. "You can't save the whole world, Caleb, but you can be there for Ghost, and maybe, just maybe, that'll be enough." The night before the fair, Mason Ridge was restless. Lights flickered from distant barns, car doors slammed, voices rose in the summer dark. Ruth locked every window, checked the gates twice. Caleb slept in fits and starts, dreams full of barking, thunder, and the sharp tang of fear. Ghost whined at his bedside, unable to settle. Caleb slid down to the floor, arms wrapped around the big dog's neck. "It's okay, boy. We're together. Whatever happens, I'm not letting go." Ghost's heartbeat thudded against Caleb's chest, a steady promise in the dark. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the porch swing. Somewhere, far away, the first notes of the fair's calliope music drifted on the breeze, a song that carried both hope and danger. In the morning, Ruth packed a small lunch and handed Caleb his harmonica, polished and bright. "Ah, you don't have to go if you're not ready," she said. Caleb looked at Ghost, at the scars healed, the trust hard won. "I'm ready. We'll face him together." Ruth pulled him into a fierce hug, eyes shining with pride and worry all tangled together. "Remember, Caleb, don't let him set the rules. You lead with kindness, always." As they drove towards the fairgrounds, the farm fell quiet behind them, only the echo of their courage left in the morning sun. The world waited at the edge of Mason Ridge, hungry for a show. But Caleb and Ghost were done being someone else's spectacle. They had their own, song to play. The Mason Ridge Fall Fair was always more spectacle than celebration. Half tradition, half test of who could endure the noise, the dust, the heat, and the stare of too many strangers. This year, the crowd seemed thicker, voices louder, the air charged with something sharp and restless. Sunlight glared off the bright white tents, bouncing from the chrome of pickup trucks, and mixing with the sweet smell of kettle corn and the bitter tang of hay and diesel. Caleb arrived with Ruth and Ghost just before noon, the three of them moving through the throng like a small island. Ghost pressed close to Caleb's knee, body taut, head low, nose twitching with every new scent and sound. Ruth squeezed Caleb's shoulder, her eyes darting through the chaos, watchful, protective, as if she could shield him from the eyes that followed everywhere. They passed the livestock ring, kids squealing over prize pigs, and the whir of the Ferris wheel spun above it all. But the heart of the fair was the main arena, a circle of trampled dirt, flanked by metal bleachers crowded with neighbors, ranch hands, and strangers looking for a show. Caleb caught the glint of Cross's Stetson before he heard his voice, amplified by the arena speakers. Cross stood in the center ring, smile wide and cold, one hand gripping the leash of a young German shepherd, Rex. Even from a distance, Caleb saw the tension in the dog's thin body, the dullness in his eyes, the scars hidden under patchy fur. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cross boomed, drawing out every word, "today we show what real discipline can do. Watch and learn." Rex was dragged into the ring, tail between his legs, paws stumbling. Cross barked orders, snapping the leash with each command. "Sit. Down. Heel!" his voice slicing through the noise. The crowd responded with nervous laughter, a few scattered claps, and a murmur of discomfort. Caleb felt his fists clench. Ghost pressed closer, trembling but steady, eyes fixed on Rex. Ruth leaned in, voice low. "You don't have to do anything, Caleb. Just remember who you are." But Caleb couldn't look away. Cross's demo was a performance. Force, intimidation, the show of power over something weaker. Each failed command made the crowd's laughter colder, sharper. Rex's panic grew with every shout. Still finally, a balloon popped nearby and the dog lunged, snapping the leash from Cross's grip. For a split second, the whole arena froze. Then everything shattered. Rex bolted toward the edge of the ring, a blur of black and tan fur, eyes wide and wild. People screamed. A small child near the fence tripped, her ice cream falling as she tumbled into the dirt. Parents scrambled to grab their kids. The fair erupted in chaos, screams, the scramble of boots, the shriek of the PA system as someone fumbled with the mic. Cross lunged, shouting for security. The dog barreled past the judge's table, scattering papers and lemonade. Caleb's heart thudded in his chest, breath sharp and tight. Ghost barked low and urgent, muscles coiling for action. "Stay," Caleb whispered, hand trembling. Ghost's ears flicked back, caught between instinct and command. Rex, terrified, dodged a woman's outstretched arms and ran straight toward the crowd, aiming for any path of escape. The space between him and the child shrank in a heartbeat. Caleb moved without thinking. He vaulted the low fence, knees skidding in the dirt, harmonica clattering from his pocket as he fell. Ghost leapt after him, landing solid, moving with purpose, not panic. The crowd fell silent, the whole fair suspended in a breath. All that noise, all that spectacle, now just the sound of two dogs, a heavy breathing, the scrape of Caleb's boots, and the distant music of the carnival. Rex froze, hackles up, teeth bared. Ghost placed himself between the runaway dog and the terrified child, body low, tail still, eyes meeting Rex's in a silent conversation only dogs could share. Caleb eased closer, voice soft and steady. "It's okay," he said, though his own voice shook. "Nobody's gonna hurt you." Rex's head lowered, body trembling, every muscle ready to snap or surrender. The child's mother reached for her, hands shaking, pulling her daughter back from the chaos. A ripple of tension moved through the arena. Cross stalked forward, face red, voice cracking. "Out of the way! That animal's dangerous. Security, get that mutt!" But Caleb didn't move. He knelt, dirt staining his jeans, the harmonica shaking in his hand. For a moment, the world shrank to a single point. Just Caleb, the two dogs, and the hush that followed disaster. He raised the harmonica to his lips, drawing a breath so slow he could hear his own heartbeat, and played the same halting, breathy tune he'd played the night of the auction. The melody wove through the dust, soft but clear, uncertain but kind. Rex's body loosened just a fraction. Ghost stepped closer, sitting at Caleb's side, offering the safety of his presence. Caleb kept playing, letting the song do what words never could. Rex's panic ebbed. His breathing slowed. He crept forward, head down, until he reached Caleb and Ghost. Both dogs sat beside the boy, breathing hard but still. The moment stretched, delicate as spider silk. A teenager in the stands, eyes wide, lifted a phone and started filming, hands shaking so badly the image blurred. The arena, packed a moment ago with noise and chaos, fell silent enough to hear the wind. Somewhere, someone started to cry. Ruth, on the edge of the crowd, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. For the first time in years, she felt hope bloom. Fragile, but real. Cross seethed, shoving security guards out of his way, trying to reassert control. "You all saw it. That kid's got something. Drugs, tricks. I don't know. This isn't real." But nobody listened. The story was already slipping out of his hands. As the sun dipped lower, painting the arena in honey light, Caleb sat with Ghost and Rex in the center of the ring. He played the last notes of his tune, letting it hang in the air. Soft, healing, true. And for the first time all day, the fair was quiet. That night, as they drove home, Ruth squeezed Caleb's hand. "You did good, honey. You showed them what kindness looks like, no matter what he says." Ghost slept on the truck's back seat, Rex's scent still on his fur, both of them exhausted. Caleb watched the sky through the dusty glass, stars just beginning to prick through the velvet dark. He knew tomorrow might bring trouble, doubt, and rumor. But for now, there was only peace. A boy, two dogs, and a song that changed everything. The night after the fair, Mason Ridge seemed to hold its breath. The carnival lights flickered out one by one, leaving only moonlight spilling over the empty arena and silent trucks parked on the trampled grass. Somewhere, far off, a coyote howled, and the world felt just a little bigger, quieter, changed. Caleb rode home, in the cab of Ruth's pickup, the harmonica cool in his palm. Ghost curled up against his side. He watched the lights of the town disappear behind them, a soft ache in his chest. There was a hush inside the truck, broken only by the hum of the tires, and Ruth's hand resting steady on the wheel. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full of things that didn't need saying. Relief, disbelief, a tired sort of hope. At home, Ruth helped Caleb guide Ghost inside. The big shepherd moved slowly, exhaustion heavy in every step. Caleb spread an old blanket on the living room floor and sat down, Ghost pressing close, his breathing slow and even. For a while, Caleb just listened, to the creak of the house settling, to Ghost's heartbeat, to the wind tapping at the window. Up in his room later, Caleb couldn't sleep. The night replayed itself in fragments, the crowd's shouts, Cross's rage, the chaos as Rex broke free, the child's cry, the wild stillness when the music began. Over and over he saw Rex's trembling body, Ghost's silent courage, the circle of trust that formed between them. He stared at the ceiling until the first hints of dawn crept in, then padded quietly downstairs. Ghost looked up, eyes soft, a tail thumping once, a steady promise in the new day. The fair's aftermath rippled out like a stone in a pond. The next morning, someone sent Ruth a video, a shaky phone clip, already spreading fast online. It showed the chaos, then the quiet, Caleb, harmonica trembling in his hands, Ghost and Rex flanking him, the hush in the air. Kid calms two dangerous dogs with music, the headline read. In less than a day, the story was everywhere, on local Facebook pages, in group texts, whispered in the aisles at the grocery store. Ruth watched the video in the kitchen, tears running down her cheeks. "You did it, Caleb," she whispered. "You showed them all." But not everyone believed what they saw. Cross was the loudest. He called the radio station that morning, voice angry and brittle. "It's a trick. That boy doped those dogs. Or he trained them with food. No kid can do that. Nobody can." His words echoed through the town. Some people nodded, distrustful, always hungry for scandal. But most just shook their heads, replaying the moment over and over. A boy, a harmonica, and two broken dogs choosing calm over chaos. At school, Caleb felt the shift. Some kids pointed at him in the halls, whispering, awed or afraid. A girl in math class slipped him a note. "I saw you at the fair. That was brave." Tyler Grady, who used to mock him, now kept his distance, unsure, unsettled. That afternoon, as Caleb walked home, a woman he'd never met pulled her car over, window rolling down. "You're the boy from the video, aren't you?" She looked nervous, hopeful. "My dog. He's a rescue too. He's scared all the time. Could you, maybe, help?" Caleb stammered, surprised. I don't know. I just sit with him. I wait." The woman nodded, eyes shining. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Word spread. A family called Ruth's farm, their voice trembling over the line. "Our son's dog bit him. We're afraid, but can you show us what you did?" Someone left a letter in their mailbox. No return address, just a note. "Thank you for showing us what kindness can do. We believe." Caleb felt the weight of it. Each call, each whisper, each hope. He never gave interviews, never answered the messages, just kept doing what he always had. Waking up early, feeding the goats, sketching by the barn, playing his slow, halting tunes for Ghost in the hush of evening. Not all the ripples were gentle. Cross was furious. He called Ruth, threatened to sue, called the sheriff, demanded the video be taken down. But nobody listened. The story had moved beyond his reach. Late one night, as rain drummed on the roof, Ruth found Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, Ghost sprawled at his feet, both of them staring into the quiet. Ruth poured 2 mugs of cocoa, one for herself, one for Caleb, and sat down. "He can't hurt you, honey," she said. "Not now." The whole world saw the truth. Caleb nodded, but something restless flickered in his eyes. "I don't want to be famous. I just want things to be normal." Ruth smiled, weary and proud. "Maybe you made a new kind of normal, Caleb. Maybe that's what the world needs." Caleb thought about that a long time. He looked down at Ghost, at the scars faded now to pale lines. He remembered the first night on the porch, the distance that had lived between them, the silent promise of patience and time. Days passed. Each evening, families came to the farm, tentative, searching. Ruth made tea, offered chairs under the big tree by the goat pen. Caleb would sit, Ghost by his side, listening as children told stories of dogs who barked or bit or ran from every kindness. Caleb never gave advice, never claimed to know answers. He just showed them what he'd learned. How to wait, how to listen, how to trust the quiet. Sometimes he played a tune on his harmonica, slow and careful, the notes carrying out across the fields. Ghost would settle, calm and steady, the kids watching with wide, hopeful eyes. Some dogs came closer, some stayed back. Some never changed, not right away. But something always softened, the fear, the anger, the ache of not belonging. One evening, a little boy with freckles sat down beside Caleb. "How do you make them listen?" he whispered. Caleb shrugged, gaze gentle. "I don't make them. I just sit with them. And I wait." The boy nodded, understanding more than words could say. That summer, the farm felt different, fuller, alive with voices and laughter and hope. The pain and scars were still there for Caleb and Ghost, but they'd been joined by something new, the fragile, persistent belief that things could change. And out in the world, people watched the video, told the story, and wondered what would happen if they, too, could learn to wait, to listen, to trust. For Caleb, it was never about being a hero. It was about healing, slow, patient, real, and in that gentle work, everything changed. Mason Ridge changed in small ways after the fall fair. There was no parade, no official celebration, just quiet shifts like the slow tilt of the sun across Ruth's goat fields, almost invisible unless you paid attention. But in the days and weeks after that afternoon, echoes of the arena rippled out through the community and far beyond, changing lives in ways no one could have predicted. The video of Caleb, Ghost, and Rex traveled far and fast. It was shared on neighborhood groups, then town message boards, then by someone with a cousin in Austin who knew a local news producer. Soon, Caleb's face appeared in a news segment, his voice shaky, harmonica trembling in his hands, while Ghost and Rex sat at his sides, an image of uneasy trust and quiet power. Reporters called the farm, their voices bright with curiosity and the promise of a story. Ruth fielded their questions with the same calm she used to handle rowdy goats. "We're just taking care of each other out here," she'd say, refusing interviews, declining offers for TV appearances, always steering attention back to the heart of what mattered. But curiosity was hungry. Families from nearby towns began arriving, hesitant, hopeful, their own wounded dogs in tow. Some had seen the video, some had only heard whispers, but all carried the same question in their eyes. Could kindness really change the broken things? They parked on the grass, opened back seats and crates. Gia coaxed frightened animals down the drive and waited quietly under the cottonwoods. Caleb never put up a sign. He never charged a fee. He just sat in the grass, harmonica in his lap, Ghost by his side, and waited with them. Sometimes the dogs would lunge or bark or cower behind their owners, unable to trust. Caleb didn't push. He just waited, letting the hush fill the space. When the moment was right, he played a song, notes drifting over the barn and fields, slow and searching, a promise that this time, nobody was going to hurt them. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a trick, a passing fad. But more than a few began to believe, not because the dogs were suddenly perfect, but because something changed. Tiny, almost invisible, but real. A tail wagged, a nose inched closer, a pair of eyes, always watchful, softened for a heartbeat. Still, the shadows lingered. Cross was louder than ever, his pride cut raw. He bought radio time, hired lawyers, even tried to convince the county sheriff to investigate Ruth's farm for illegal animal training. He told anyone who would listen that Caleb had sedated the dogs at the fair, that the video was fake, that people were fools for believing it. Some folks listened to Cross, at least at first. There were whispers at church, rumors at the feed store. A few people stopped bringing their dogs. Someone spray-painted "fake" on Ruth's mailbox one morning before dawn. But most ignored the noise. The people who'd seen the change up close, who'd felt their own wounds start to mend in the quiet company of the boy and his dog, held on to what they knew. They left notes of thanks on Ruth's porch, baskets of eggs, jars of honey, sometimes just a folded slip of paper that read, "You helped us more than you know." Caleb kept to his rhythm, up with the sun, chores in the goat pen, afternoons by the barn with Ghost, evenings spent sketching by lamplight. He never got used to the attention. He still ducked his head when strangers called his name, still flushed when someone thanked him for what he'd done. Sometimes, when the world felt too big, he'd walk the back field at dusk, Ghost trotting alongside, the sky streaked in orange and purple. He'd play the harmonica soft and low, notes carrying through the grass. Ghost would sit close, eyes half closed, a steady anchor. Ruth noticed how much Caleb had changed. His shoulders a little straighter, his voice steadier. The way he reached for Ghost now, not just for comfort, but to offer it. She watched the parade of cars coming down the drive, the quiet way Caleb welcomed strangers, and knew that the old ache she'd carried for years was finally slowly healing too. One day, a stranger knocked on the door, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard. She introduced herself as Dr. Helen Price, a traveling veterinarian who'd heard the story, followed the videos, and decided to see for herself. Ruth invited her in, poured her coffee, and listened as Dr. Price spoke of the work she did, helping anxious animals, teaching families how to listen, not just command. She watched Caleb with Ghost and the visiting dogs, her gaze sharp and kind. "Most people want quick fixes," Dr. Price said. You do something different. You give them time." Caleb shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just waiting. Sometimes that's all you can do." Dr. Price smiled. "Waiting is the hardest thing in the world for most people." That afternoon, she offered to help, bringing medical supplies, advice, gentle encouragement. Together with Ruth, they started dreaming about something new. A place on the farm where scared dogs, tired people, and anyone in need of healing could come. No yelling, no harsh hands, just patience, presence, and quiet trust. They called it the listening place. And as word spread, the barn became more than just a shelter for animals. It became a sanctuary for anyone, human or dog, carrying scars, searching for a little bit of peace. Still, doubt lingered at the edges. There were always those who looked for shortcuts, who asked Caleb for the trick, who didn't want to wait, who gave up when change came slow. Some dogs went home unchanged. Some people left disappointed. But there were more victories than failures. Ruth kept a notebook by her bed, recording every small miracle. A boy who'd once been bitten, now reading to a trembling pup. A woman whose rescue dog, silent for years, let her stroke his fur for the first time. An old man who said, "You helped me more than you helped my dog." The echoes of the fair never fully faded. Cross's anger burned out, little by little, like a storm that never quite reached them. People stopped listening to him, stopped needing his approval, and in the hush that followed, Caleb, Ghost, and Ruth found themselves at the center of something they never meant to build, a quiet revolution made of patience, kindness, and the belief that sometimes the smallest changes can echo the farthest. One evening, as the last light faded over the fields, Caleb sat on the porch with Ghost and Ruth, the world peaceful around them. He played a gentle tune, slow and true. Ghost laid his head on Caleb's knee, and Ruth leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the music carry her. And in that soft, endless moment, everything felt possible. By early autumn, the goat farm had become something entirely new. The old barn, once filled with nothing but hay, spare tools, and the bleating of goats, buzzed with a different kind of life. Ruth, Dr. Helen Price, and Caleb, with help from a handful of neighbors and a grant from the County Animal Welfare Fund, transformed it into a place unlike anything Mason Ridge had seen before. It started with repairs. Ruth's cousin hauled in new lumber for the sagging beams, and Dr. Price showed up on weekends with paint and boxes of supplies, blankets, chew toys, calming pheromone sprays. They sanded the splinters off the old feed benches and lined the stalls with soft mats. Ruth hung lace curtains on the tiny windows, letting filtered sunlight spill across the floor. Outside, Caleb painted a sign in his careful, slanted print. The listening place. No one could quite explain what it was at first. Not a clinic, not a shelter, not just a rescue. Word spread anyway, carried by whispers, social media, and the persistent hope of people who needed somewhere to go. The rules were simple. No shouting, no jerking, yanking, or scolding. No quick fixes, no empty promises. Instead, wait, watch, listen. Let healing come as slowly as it needs. Ghost became the heart of the place in ways Caleb could never have predicted. The big shepherd moved among the newcomers with quiet authority, modeling calm, his gaze steady but gentle. Anxious mutts, strays, and beloved pets with hidden scars seemed to relax just a little when Ghost pressed his nose against their shoulder or settled beside them in the straw. He didn't dominate. He offered the simple reassurance of presence, showing other dogs how safety felt. Caleb's role was quieter. He welcomed each family with a soft smile, never rushing introductions. He let children show him drawings of their history and their dogs, listened to stories of bites and escapes and long, fearful nights. Sometimes if a dog trembled too much to come close, Caleb would sit across the stall, harmonica in his hands, playing a gentle tune as the animal listened from a distance. Ruth organized schedules, greeted every new arrival as if they were old friends. She made tea and handed out home-baked bread, her voice a steady comfort in the bustling barn. Dr. Price rotated between the stalls, offering advice, small medical care, in a patient ear to anyone who needed it. Most of the healing happened slowly, in moments too small to make headlines. A beagle who flinched at every raised hand, learning to trust the brush of gentle fingers. A family who'd almost given up, watching their shepherd mix nudge his head under their arm for the first time. An old golden retriever, silent since his owner died, lying down beside Ghost and sighing out the weight of months of grief. Sometimes there were setbacks. A bark would echo sharp and frightened. A dog would bolt for the door. A parent would break down in tears, overwhelmed by frustration and guilt. Caleb never tried to fix these moments. He just waited, Ghost at his side, letting the quiet stretch until something softened. Evenings at the listening place became a kind of ritual. Families stayed late, sipping tea under the porch lights, sharing stories and small victories. The children drew chalk hearts on the barn floor, traced paw prints in the dust. Some nights, the air filled with the sound of Caleb's harmonica, slow and searching, notes weaving together grief and hope. Neighbors who'd once doubted, who'd gossiped and second-guessed, found themselves drawn to the barn. Some came to help, carrying in hay or mending fences. Others just sat on the steps, letting the peace of the place settle around them. Cross, for his part, grew quiet. His ranch faded to the background, his protests lost in the rising chorus of gratitude. Where once he'd been the loudest voice in town, now he was barely a rumor, a reminder of what fear and pride could do. One Saturday, a woman arrived from 3 counties over, her hands trembling as she carried a trembling puppy inside. She told Ruth how her son, a quiet boy with big dark eyes, hadn't spoken since his father left. The puppy bit at every hand, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Caleb sat with the boy in a corner of the barn. He offered him the harmonica, showed him how to press his lips to the metal and make a sound, any sound, no matter how broken or off-key. The boy tried, laughter breaking through the silence for the first time in months. The puppy cocked its head, ears up, and inched a little closer. It was a small thing, but it was everything. Dr. Price started keeping a journal, recording in these moments. Healing doesn't mean fixing all that's broken, she wrote. It means making space for trust to grow and letting the brokenness become part of something bigger, softer, and new. Late one evening, after everyone had left, Caleb lingered in the barn, sketchbook in hand. Ghost lay nearby, eyes half closed. Ruth swept the floor, humming softly. Dr. Price gathered her bag and paused in the doorway, watching them all. "This place is special," she said. "You've done something here? Something I've never seen?" Caleb looked up, searching for the right words. "We just listen." Dr. Price smiled, her eyes bright. "That's more than most people ever learn." As autumn deepened, the air sharpened, and the first frost crept across the fields, the listening place filled with warmth, of lanterns, of laughter, of new trust growing where fear had once lived. Dogs rested curled together in the straw. Children read aloud from storybooks, and grown-ups learned, day by day, to set down their burdens and wait. And it wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. But for the first time, in a long time, the broken things had found a place to belong. And outside, the world watched and it listened and quietly began to hope. The first frost clung to the edge of the goat fields, sparkling under the early sun like 1,000 tiny lanterns. Smoke drifted from Ruth's chimney, curling into the pale blue morning. The barn glowed with lantern light, and the hush before chores was gentle, golden. This was the hour when even the broken things in the world seemed to rest easy. Just for a moment, Caleb padded barefoot through the dew, harmonica tucked into his pocket, Ghost's heavy paws silent at his side. They walked the perimeter together every dawn, boy and dog, moving in sync, a steady ritual that grounded them both. Ghost pressed his nose to the fence post, sniffed the crisp air, then trotted ahead, turning back with a look that always asked, "Are you coming?" Inside the barn, the day was already stirring. Ruth swept the aisle, humming under her breath, while Dr. Price scribbled notes in her weathered journal. In the straw near the back wall, a new arrival, a trembling brown mutt, eyes wide, coat matted, curled into herself, refusing food, refusing comfort. Her owner, a woman with lines of worry etched deep on her face, stood a little apart, hope and heartbreak written across her hands. Caleb set his blanket in the straw, close but not too close, and waited. Ghost lay down beside him, his big body relaxed, head resting on his paws. Sunlight streamed in through a cracked window, painting their faces in gold. For a long time, nothing happened. Just breathing, just the sound of goats shifting in their stalls, Ruth sweeping, Dr. Price's quiet murmur as she bandaged a beagle's paw. Yeah. Outside, the world was waking, trucks rumbling on the distant highway, crows rising from the fence line. Caleb reached into his pocket, found the cool weight of the harmonica, and set it gently on his knee. He didn't look at the dog, didn't look at the woman. He simply waited, letting the air settle, letting trust find its own slow way. Ghost's tail thumped once, patient, certain. He lifted the harmonica to his lips and breathed out a tune, slow and wandering, the kind that sounded like home and longing and sunrise all at once. The music floated through the barn, weaving between beams of light, curling into the spaces where hurt and fear liked to hide. Ruth paused her sweeping. Dr. Price closed her journal, listening. The brown mutt shifted in the straw, eyes flicking to Ghost, then to Caleb, then away. Her body trembled, but her ears inched forward, and she crept closer, one cautious paw at a time, drawn by the hush and the melody. Ghost didn't move, didn't demand, just offered his silent company, his own presence, steady and sure. The dog's tail twitched, uncertain, then wagged, once, then again, timid but real. The woman knelt, tears shining, hands pressed to her chest. She didn't speak. She let the dog choose. Caleb lowered the harmonica, hands resting in his lap. He whispered, barely above a breath, "It's okay. You're safe." The mutt crawled forward, pressed herself against Ghost's warm side, and let out a long, shaking sigh. A sound so deep it seemed to rise from somewhere older than fear. The barn was silent except for breathing, the gentle shift of straw, and the quiet miracle of trust given, not earned. Ruth watched from the doorway, eyes wet, remembering the first days, how Caleb and Ghost had circled each other, wounded and wary, both carrying more pain than words could hold. Now she saw the boy's shoulders relaxed, the way Ghost's eyes softened when Caleb was near, the way hope had come to live among them, stubborn and bright. Dr. Price scribbled a single line in her notebook. Some kids lead by yelling, some by force, and some by sitting still long enough for something broken to believe again. The listening place became part of Mason Ridge's story. Families came and went, carrying away more than just calmer dogs. They carried the memory of patience, the lesson that healing was slow, sometimes silent, but always possible. People began to show up for each other, not just for their animals. Men who once stood apart at church now traded bread recipes in Ruth's kitchen. Teenagers who'd laughed at Caleb asked to help muck stalls, shy and eager all at once. Caleb never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a boy who knew how it felt to be lost, to be quiet, to hope for one good thing to come along. Ghost was just a dog who'd survived too much and learned, somehow, that not all hands hurt and not all cages last forever. One night, as the first snow whispered down, Caleb stood in the doorway, watching flakes swirl in the glow from the porch. Ghost pressed close, warm against his leg. The world felt quiet, endless, filled with possibility. He played a soft song, notes drifting out across the fields, a promise to every hurt thing listening in the dark. You are not alone. Someone is waiting for you. There is a place where you can rest. And in that hush, Mason Ridge slept easier. Hope curled into corners that had been empty for too long. As the weeks slipped by, Ruth hung a hand-lettered sign on the barn. If you believe quiet kindness can change even the most wounded hearts. Sit a while. Listen. Stay. Caleb and Ghost sat together in the golden light, welcoming every new stranger, every scared dog, every parent at the end of their rope. No magic, no miracle, just the slow, steady work of love. The story they made together was never just about healing dogs or even people. It was about making a home out of patience and gentleness, about teaching a town, and maybe a world, that broken things could be made whole, not by force, but by waiting and listening and believing. In every night, in a barn full of hope, a boy played a song, a dog pressed close, and hearts that had once been lost learned, finally, how to belong. Like and share if you believe quiet kindness can change even the most wounded hearts.